The galaxy was vast and complex, with countless civilizations scattered across the stars. Every species had its place in the intricate web of power and influence. But for centuries, the Zolthari stood at the top of the hierarchy. Their empire was a beacon of technological marvel and unshakable strength. They were a species that conquered and expanded without fear, their fleets cutting through space like blades through the air, until one day something changed. A mysterious signal began to pulse through the far reaches of the galaxy, its coordinates locked onto Earth. It was faint, barely noticeable at first, but then it grew stronger, pulsing with desperation and fear. The message was a simple plea, a call for help. But it was the target that raised questions. The Zolthari were not a species known for weakness. They had dominated their neighbors with ease. So why would they seek aid from a planet considered primitive by the galactic standards? Earth was a blip on the radar, a forgotten species in the eyes of the galaxy's elite. And yet here they were pleading for help from a species far behind them, technologically and militarily. The message was almost indecipherable. It contained strange symbols and codes never before seen by Earth's scientists. But when the Federation's decryption team cracked it, the truth became chilling. The Zolthari were under attack by an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered, an alien race so advanced and merciless that even the might of the Zolthari Empire could not withstand them. Their ships were being torn apart, their weapons useless against the onslaught. The Zolthari's once impenetrable defense systems had failed, and their cities had been razed to the ground. What was more disturbing was the enemy's strategy. They weren't just conquering. They were hunting the Zolthari like animals. Their cities were left in ruins, their people broken, desperate, and scattered. The message had been clear. The Zolthari needed help, or their entire species would be wiped out. And this was where Earth came into play. The Federation of Human Space Forces convened to discuss the situation. Initially, many dismissed the call as a trap or a trick. The Zolthari were known for their cunning and deceit, but others saw an opportunity to prove humanity's worth in the galactic stage. The decision was made to respond, but not with just any ordinary force. The Federation's leadership decided to send Earth's most deadly warriors, the ones who had earned their reputation in the toughest of battles, the ones who had fought on distant worlds and survived against overwhelming odds. They were the elite, the humans who had survived impossible odds and come out on top. No matter the challenge, they would be the ones to answer the call for rescue and save the Zolthari from the brink of extinction. Sergeant Lydia Clark was among the first to be selected. She had been a part of Earth's special forces for years, and her reputation was built on her ability to survive in the harshest environments. She had faced off against insurgents on Mars and battled hostile alien species on the fringes of the galaxy. She was tough, resourceful, and unyielding. Cal Holt was another obvious choice, a brilliant tactician who had outwitted entire fleets of hostile forces. He was the kind of strategist who could turn any battle into a victory, no matter the odds. And Julian Vos, though he was a biologist, had proven himself to be just as deadly. His research into alien pathogens and toxic environments had saved countless lives and helped defeat some of the deadliest threats Earth had faced. All three were ready to board the mission and travel to the heart of the Zolthari Empire to face whatever new enemy awaited them. The decision to send humanity's most elite warriors was not made lightly, but the urgency of the situation was clear. The Zolthari were a powerful force in the galaxy, and if they could fall to this mysterious enemy, then no one was safe. The Federation assembled the team in secrecy, knowing the importance of their mission. Their identities were to remain classified until the mission was completed. They would be Earth's first response to an intergalactic threat, and that responsibility weighed heavily on each of them. Sergeant Lydia Clark had felt the weight of the world on her shoulders before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about her survival. It was about the survival of an entire species, a species she had never met, but that was now asking for Earth's help, and there was no way she was going to let them down. As the team prepared for the mission, there was an air of uncertainty. They knew they were up against something unknown and dangerous, but no one had any idea just how dangerous it truly was. Cal Holt was deep in thought as he studied the information they had gathered about the Zolthari's attackers, the Trifactions. The name was unfamiliar to him, but the reports painted a picture of a race that was as deadly as it was enigmatic. They didn't rely on traditional tactics or technology. They adapted on the fly and learned from every battle, a strategy Holt had never encountered before. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't going to be a simple rescue mission. This was going to be a battle for survival, and he was ready for it. Tertullian Vos was also focused on the challenge ahead. While his role was to understand the biological and environmental dangers that might arise during their mission, he knew the stakes were far higher than just avoiding deadly pathogens and toxic environments. The Trifoctians were using biological warfare on a scale that had never been seen before, and Vos' expertise in alien biology would be crucial in combating it. The Zolthari's genetic material had been harvested and twisted into monstrous creations that were not only deadly but designed to hunt and kill without hesitation. Vos had a deep understanding of alien pathogens, but even he wasn't sure how he could prepare for something like this. All he could do was study and adapt as quickly as possible. The human team was briefed on the mission specifics. The Zolthari homeworld, Zolthar 7, was now a war zone. Cities burned and ruins stretched across the landscape. The Trifoctians had already decimated the Zolthari military, and their defense systems were in shambles. Earth's elite soldiers would be the last line of defense. The mission was clear: infiltrate Zolthar 7, find the source of the Trifoctian threat, and put an end to it before it spread across the galaxy. But there was a catch. No one knew exactly where the enemy was located or how they would strike back. The Zolthari were scattered and disorganized, making the entire operation feel like a giant leap into the unknown. Clark could sense the tension among her team as they prepared to depart Earth's atmosphere. The uncertainty was palpable, but that was nothing new for them. They had all fought in wars and faced overwhelming odds. But this felt different. It wasn't just a battle of strength or tactics. This was something far more insidious and unknown. As the ship blasted off into the stars, the silence in the cabin was deafening. Each member of the team was lost in their thoughts. But one thing was certain: they were all in this together. They were humanity's last hope, and they would not fail. As the human team's ship descended toward Zolthar 7, the first thing that struck them was the sheer silence of the planet below. There were no bustling cities, no advanced infrastructure glowing with energy, just a bleak, smoke-choked sky, and the remnants of once great civilizations now reduced to rubble. Clark could see the devastation from the cockpit window, the scale of destruction far greater than anything she had imagined. The Zolthari, once proud and invincible, now seemed like shadows of their former selves. As the ship touched down in a desolate crater, the team stepped out, their boots crunching over ash and debris. The air was thick with tension. The Zolthari had not greeted them as they might have expected. There were no grand receptions or elaborate displays of gratitude. Instead, the few remaining Zolthari soldiers, those still able to fight, greeted them in silence, their eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and dread. These were the warriors who had once known no defeat, now battered and broken. The leader of the Zolthari military, General Torin, stepped forward. His once glorious armor was scared and dented, his expression hardened by defeat. "You're the humans who responded to our call?" Torin asked, his voice rough. Clark nodded, her gaze never wavering. "We're here to help, General. Tell us what happened." Torin's eyes darkened as he motioned for them to follow him. "We were unprepared. We didn't know what we were facing." His voice trailed off. "The Trifoctians arrived with no warning, and from that moment, everything fell apart. They didn't just destroy our military. They turned our cities into hunting grounds. They knew how to take us down, one by one. We thought our technology would be enough, but their biological warfare, it's like nothing we've ever encountered." Kel Holt, always the strategist, stepped forward. "Biological warfare? You mean they used weapons that attack your biology directly?" Torin nodded grimly. "Yes, they began by infiltrating our population, spreading a virus that weakened our immune systems, and then they unleashed their creatures, mutated beasts that were bred to hunt us. The Zoltheri were never meant to be prey. That these creatures, they know how to track us, how to hunt us. Dr. Julian Vos, listening intently, frowned. A virus that adapts and creatures that were genetically engineered to hunt. This is more than just a war. This is a systematic extermination. Clark glanced at her team, the weight of the situation settling in. They had faced threats before, but this was different. This wasn't just about military superiority. It was about survival, and the Trifoctians were making sure that the Zoltheri, and anyone else who stood in their way, wouldn't survive. We need to find out where they're coming from, Holt said, already formulating a plan. If they're breeding these creatures, there has to be a central location, a base. We need to hit them there. Toran shook his head. It's worse than that. They have no central base. They've been spreading out in waves. We think they're using our own infrastructure against us, exploiting weaknesses in our planetary defense systems. Then we'll make them pay for it, Clark said with resolve. We're not leaving until we stop this threat. The team regrouped, and as they began to formulate their next move, the sense of urgency grew stronger. Time was running out. The Trifoctians were methodical, relentless, and adaptive. They had turned a proud empire into a broken shell, and if they could do that to the Zoltheri, what was stopping them from spreading further? As Clark surveyed the wasteland before them, she realized that this mission wasn't just about saving the Zoltheri. This was a battle for the future of the galaxy itself, and humanity's reputation would either be forged or shattered by what came next. The silence was deafening as the human team listened to the Zoltheri's desperate recounting of their fall. General Toran's voice carried a weight of defeat that seemed almost tangible. Yet beneath it, Clark could feel a flicker of something else. Determination. The Zoltheri weren't completely broken, not yet. And as long as there was even a spark of resistance, the humans would fight alongside them. Clark's eyes hardened with resolve as she turned to her team. We need to find their base of operations, Holt said, his voice calm but filled with urgency. If they're spreading from multiple points, we'll have to hit them fast, disrupt their breeding facilities and their supply chains before they can mobilize again. Dr. Vos had been quietly analyzing the data they'd gathered from the Zoltheri. These creatures they're breeding, they aren't just weapons. They're adaptive, biologically engineered to be the perfect predators. If we don't figure out how to counteract their biology, they'll just keep coming. We need a more targeted approach. Clark nodded. Then let's get moving. We're not waiting for them to come to us. The team set off toward the Zoltheri capital, a place that had once been a center of grandeur, but now was a ghost town, teetering on the brink of collapse. The buildings that once housed tens of thousands of Zoltheri were now empty shells, their walls cracked and charred. The hum of life had been replaced with a haunting stillness, broken only by the distant sounds of Trifoctian creatures hunting in the ruins. As they made their way through the desolate streets, the team encountered the first signs of the Trifoctian presence, traces of their deadly creations lurking in the shadows. Huge, mutated creatures with long limbs and razor-sharp claws that had been bioengineered to hunt the Zoltheri to extinction. Clark's team engaged quickly, utilizing their advanced tactics to neutralize the creatures before they could strike. But even as they wiped out the immediate threat, Clark couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They pushed forward, each step a reminder of the stakes. The Zoltheri had once ruled this world, but now it was being overrun by an unstoppable force. They'd reached what remained of the central command hub, a fortified structure that had once been the nerve center of the Zoltheri military. It was now eerily quiet, the once imposing walls riddled with holes from recent battles. They entered cautiously, knowing the Trifoctians could be anywhere. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay, and the flicker of failing lights illuminated the hauntingly empty halls. It was clear that the Zoltheri had abandoned their post in a hurry, but what had they left behind? Holt moved to a terminal, accessing whatever data was left in the system. "I'm getting something," he said. "Looks like a map. Coordinates, probably where the Trifoctians are operating from." Dr. Vos stepped forward, examining the screen. This is bad. These locations aren't just scattered. They're organized. There's a central facility where the breeding is happening. Clark studied the map, her mind already working out a plan. This facility, we need to destroy it, and we need to do it fast. If they're breeding creatures here, this is the heart of the problem. The team regrouped, knowing this would be their most dangerous mission yet. They had seen the creatures, they understood the threat, and now they had the location. But even as they prepared for their assault, Clark couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. "We'll take it out," she said, her voice steady but filled with quiet determination. "We're going in and we're coming back alive, no matter what." With that, the team geared up for their assault, each of them fully aware of the risks but resolute in their commitment to stop the Trifaction threat once and for all. As they set off toward the central breeding facility, they could feel the weight of the mission on their shoulders. Failure wasn't an option, not when the future of the galaxy was at stake. The journey to the central breeding facility took hours, and the closer they got, the more the tension mounted. The air seemed to thicken, as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Clark led the team through the dense jungle of twisted metal and broken infrastructure that had once been Zolthari's shining capital. As they neared the facility, the landscape grew darker, more sinister. There were no signs of life, no birds, no insects, just the quiet hum of the damaged power lines running overhead, casting eerie shadows across their path. Dr. Vos was scanning the area with his equipment, trying to pick up any signs of biological threats. The bioweapons the Trifactions had engineered were unpredictable, and if they encountered any, it could turn the mission into a massacre. "There's something wrong with the air," Vos muttered, glancing nervously at his readings. "There's a high concentration of mutated spores. The Trifactions might have designed the atmosphere to weaken the Zolthari before they even get to them." Clark tightened her grip on her rifle. "We've faced worse. Keep moving." She knew they couldn't afford to slow down. Every second they wasted brought them closer to a full-scale assault by the Trifactions. The entrance to the facility loomed ahead, a monolithic structure half buried beneath piles of debris. There was no security, no automated defenses, nothing to prevent them from entering. The lack of resistance unnerved Clark. It didn't make sense. The Zolthari had gone to great lengths to protect their cities, but this place had been left unguarded. The trap was too obvious, and yet they had no choice but to walk into it. "Get ready," Clark whispered as they approached the door. Holt crouched by the control panel and began hacking into the system. The terminal flickered to life, and the sound of the door sliding open was too quiet, too smooth. It felt wrong. Inside there were no guards, no soldiers, but there were signs of the Trifactions. A dark, viscous fluid coated the walls, and in the distance they could hear a faint, unnatural chittering. "Stay sharp," Holt ordered, moving silently through the corridor. The team advanced cautiously, knowing the facility was likely crawling with Trifactions and their creations. They couldn't afford to be ambushed. As they moved deeper into the facility, the walls began to pulse with an eerie green glow, and the temperature dropped. Clark's instincts flared. She had been in enough combat zones to know when something wasn't right. "Something's wrong," she murmured, and that's when they heard it. A deep growl reverberated through the halls, followed by the sound of heavy footfalls. Clark signaled for everyone to take cover behind large debris piles. From the shadows, monstrous creatures emerged, flesh twisted into unnatural shapes, their eyes glowing with an eerie, predatory intelligence. They were no longer just animals. They were soldiers, bred for one purpose: to hunt. Dr. Vos cursed under his breath. "These are the next phase, completely biomechanical. They're hybrids. The Trifactions are evolving their creatures faster than I thought." Holt was already calculating their best course of action. "We'll need to draw them into a kill zone. There's a large chamber just ahead. If we can get there, we'll have the advantage." "On your mark, Holt," Clark said, her voice a low growl. Her rifle was already in her hands, loaded and ready. The growls of the creatures grew louder as they crept closer, the flickering lights casting long, twisted shadows along the walls. Clark's mind raced, counting the seconds, knowing they couldn't let these things get the upper hand. She glanced at her team. Vos, bracing himself with his scanner, Holt preparing a distraction. Now, Holt whispered. The trap was set. Holt activated a nearby terminal, and a loud alarm blared, drawing the attention of the creatures. They turned, snout twitching as their eyes locked on the humans hiding in the shadows. Clark's heart pounded, but her hand remained steady. The creatures took the bait, lumbering toward the noise. It was time to strike. The humans didn't hesitate. Clark's team moved with deadly precision. They opened fire, but not just randomly. Every shot counted. Every move coordinated. The creatures shrieked in fury as they charged, but the humans had them right where they wanted them. The chamber ahead was their killing ground, and the battle was about to begin in earnest. The creatures were upon them now, their twisted forms moving with terrifying speed. Clark's team had no time to think, only to react. The sound of gunfire rang out through the facility, deafening in the confined space. Clark's rifle fired in a steady rhythm, each shot aimed with precision. The creatures were fast, but their size made them unwieldy. They were like bioengineered tanks, powerful, but not invincible. Clark's shots struck true, tearing into their thick hides, but the beasts kept charging. Move back, Holt shouted, signaling to the team. They had lured the creatures into the chamber, but now they needed to trap them. Vos was already moving, his scientific curiosity momentarily replaced by survival instincts. He had seen these creatures up close, but never with this kind of urgency. He'd spent his career studying alien biology, but these were beyond anything he had encountered before. The hybrid creatures were faster, more resilient, and their eyes, those glowing eyes, were full of intelligence. They were evolving before his eyes, adapting, reacting to their attacks with frightening speed. Dr. Vos. Clark's voice snapped him back to the present. We need to take these things down, now. Vos nodded, quickly pulling a device from his pack. It was a biological disruptor, something he had developed to counteract alien pathogens. But now, it would serve a different purpose. He aimed it at one of the creatures. Activating the device, a high-pitched sound emanated from the disruptor, causing the creature to twitch violently. It staggered back, screeching in pain. But it wasn't enough. Vos cursed under his breath. It was resistant, stronger than he anticipated. Not enough, Vos muttered. He fired again, adjusting the frequency. This time, the creature recoiled, its glowing eyes dimming for a brief moment. Got one down, Holt called out as the beast crumpled to the floor, but there was no time to celebrate. More were coming. The sounds of their growls grew louder, and the ground beneath them shook with each heavy step. Clark motioned for Vos and Holt to fall back toward the center of the chamber. We need a better plan. These things are too strong. Any ideas? Holt's mind was already working. There's a reactor core in this facility. If we overload it, we can use it to create a chain reaction. It'll take them all out at once. He paused, glancing at Clark. It's risky, but we don't have time for anything else. Clark's eyes narrowed. Let's do it. We don't leave until this place is in ashes. The team moved quickly, engaging the creatures as they pushed toward the central reactor room. Holt led the way, using his knowledge of the facility's layout to guide them through the winding corridors. Every now and then, the creatures lunged from the shadows, their claws slashing, their jaws snapping. Clark fired, her shots methodical, taking down the ones closest to them. Vos, moving with surprising speed for a scientist, used his disruptor to disable another creature, buying them precious moments. The reactor room was ahead, its door sealed tightly. Holt hacked into the terminal, bypassing security protocols. It wasn't easy, and the clock was ticking. They had no idea how long they had before the Trifoxians realized they were here and sent reinforcements. Vos stood guard, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows, waiting for the next wave of enemies. The door slid open with a heavy hiss, revealing the heart of the facility. The reactor, a massive, pulsating machine that hummed with unnatural energy. Holt moved immediately to the control panel, his fingers flying over the keys as he worked to override the system. "Once this thing goes, we need to be far away," Holt said, glancing at Clark. "I'm setting it to overload in 15 minutes. Clark nodded, her eyes scanning the darkened hallway outside. "Get it done, Holt. We'll cover you." The team took up defensive positions as Holt worked quickly. The creatures were closing in, drawn by the noise of the reactor room and the scent of blood. Clark's pulse quickened as the footsteps of the beasts grew louder. They had minutes, no more. They had to hold their ground. The sound of the creatures' growls echoed through the facility, their snarls growing louder as they closed in on the team. Clark's grip tightened around her rifle. She had no intention of dying here, not while the mission was still unfinished. Holt was still working furiously at the terminal, his fingers flying over the keys as he tried to set the reactor to overload. The seconds felt like hours, and every moment that passed seemed to bring the creatures closer. "Clark, cover the rear," Holt barked without looking up from his work. Clark didn't hesitate. She took position near the entrance, her back against the cold metal wall. Vos stood a few paces behind her, his disruptor at the ready, eyes scanning the hallway for any signs of movement. The air in the reactor room was thick with the hum of the power core, and the tension made it almost impossible to think clearly. Every sound was amplified, each click of their weapons, every step of the creatures. It was only a matter of time before the beasts would rush in. Clark's heart raced as she peered down the dark hallway, but nothing prepared her for the sudden explosion of movement. A beast, its body glistening with the unnatural green glow of its bioengineered form, lunged from the shadows. Its fangs gleamed in the dim light, and its claws slashed through the air with terrifying speed. Clark fired, hitting it square in the chest, but the creature kept coming. "Clark," Holt's voice cracked through the chaos. "We got less than 10 minutes." She fired again, this time targeting its head. The creature stumbled back, its body convulsing, but it was still alive, still coming. Vos opened fire with his disruptor, hitting the creature with a pulse that caused it to recoil in pain, but it was clear these beasts were not going down easily. They were relentless. "Get back," Clark shouted. She grabbed Vos by the arm, yanking him toward cover just as another wave of creatures appeared from the shadows. The sound of their clawed feet skittering across the metal floor was deafening. Holt's voice cut through the growing noise of battle. "I'm almost there. Just keep them off me for a little longer." The creatures rushed forward, and the team's firepower intensified. Clark dropped to one knee, unloading a full clip into a creature charging straight at her. The blast tore into its side, sending it crashing to the floor. But before she could reload, another beast was already on her heels, its jagged teeth snapping just inches from her face. In a blur, Vos moved forward, disruptor in hand. He aimed carefully, firing at the creature's hind legs. The blast staggered it, throwing it off balance long enough for Clark to land a final shot to its head, killing it instantly. She wiped the sweat from her brow, eyes darting around the room. The countdown was ticking, and they were losing time. "We need to move now." Holt's voice was urgent as the reactor began to hum louder, its energy increasing. The creatures were coming in waves now, faster and more aggressive. Holt slammed his fist against the terminal. "Done. Reactors set to overload. We've got 5 minutes." Clark didn't need to be told twice. "Fall back to the entrance, now," she commanded. The team fell into a tight formation, moving swiftly but carefully as they retreated from the reactor room. Clark kept her rifle at the ready, firing at anything that moved. The beasts were relentless, but they were slowing down, their numbers thinning out with each strike. As they approached the door to the facility's main exit, they were met with another wave of creatures. Clark's heart pounded as they fought through the last of them, retreating further into the facility's tunnels. Sweat poured down her face, her body aching from the fight, but they couldn't stop. They had to get out. Almost there, Holt shouted over the comms. "We're 30 seconds from the surface." Clark's eyes locked onto the exit, and she pushed herself harder. They were close. The reactor's overload would tear this entire facility apart. The countdown in her mind ticked down with each step. The ground beneath them shook violently as the reactor began its chain reaction. The walls cracked, and the sound of metal groaning filled the air. They were almost there, just a few more steps. The ground shook beneath their feet as the team sprinted toward the exit, the countdown ticking in Clark's mind like a drumbeat. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before them, the metallic walls groaning as the reactor's energy surged, ready to explode. The creatures, relentless in their pursuit, were still closing in from behind. Clark could hear their claws scraping against the floor, their screeches echoing in the tunnel. But there was no time to fight them off. Not now. "Move faster," Holt yelled, his voice sharp with urgency. His fingers were flying over his comm panel, coordinating their route to the surface. The emergency doors that led to the outer tunnels were ahead, but each step felt like it took them further away from safety. Clark didn't dare look back. She couldn't afford to lose focus now. Every second counted. Vos, struggling to keep up, was at the rear of the group, firing his disruptor at any creature that came too close. His breath came in ragged gasps, but there was no time for rest. Every shot he fired seemed to do little more than slow the creatures down, but it bought them precious moments. Clark's heart pounded as she kept her eyes fixed on the exit ahead. The countdown in her mind was nearing its final seconds, and she could feel the heat of the impending blast growing stronger with every passing moment. The walls trembled, and a loud, deafening screech split the air. The creatures were getting closer, but they were also growing more disoriented, distracted by the increasingly unstable facility. "Get to the door," Clark shouted, her voice firm despite the rising panic. She reached the entrance first, slamming her shoulder against the emergency release mechanism. The door groaned as it slowly began to open, and the smell of fresh air hit her like a wall. They were close. So close. Holt was right behind her, and Vos came next, dragging his feet but not slowing down. Just as the last of the creatures closed in, Clark pushed through the door, pulling Vos with her. The outside world was a welcome sight, even though it was just as bleak as the planet they had left behind. The dark sky loomed overhead, and the air felt cold and thick with the energy of the reactor's impending meltdown. "Move, move," Clark barked. The doors slammed shut behind them, and they didn't stop to look back. They ran toward the evacuation zone, the ship waiting for them just beyond the crumbled remains of a Zolthari outpost. They didn't know if they would make it in time, but they didn't have a choice. Behind them, the facility shuddered violently, and a burst of light lit up the horizon. The ground quaked, and a wave of heat and shock radiated outward from the explosion. The air was filled with dust and debris as the entire facility was obliterated in a brilliant flash. The force of the explosion threw them all off balance, but they kept running, driven by sheer adrenaline and the knowledge that they had to survive. Clark heard Vos's voice in the comms, breathless but steady. "Did we stop it? Did we stop the threat?" Clark didn't stop to answer. She knew what the explosion meant. Everything the Trifoxians had been building, every creature they had engineered, was now gone. The facility was destroyed, the heart of their operation obliterated. The threat for now had been neutralized. As they reached the ship and climbed aboard, Clark looked out at the now smoking ruins in the distance. The battle had been brutal, the cost high, but they had done it. The galaxy was safe. For now. The hatch sealed behind them, and the ship's engines roared to life, lifting off from the surface of Zolthar 7. Clark sat in the cockpit, her fingers still gripping the controls as she exhaled slowly. They had won, but the fight was far from over. There would be other threats, other battles. But for now, the team had proven something important. Humanity's most deadly soldiers had not only answered the call, they had answered it in a way that no one else could. And in the end, that was what made humans truly dangerous. Their unwillingness to back down, no matter the odds.